Planning an event and wondering how you can give your attendees the best experience possible? Take advantage of customized meetings with Hilton that make it easier than ever to incorporate health, wellness, and great breaks. Hilton will help you build an extraordinary meeting that attendees will remember. To book your next meeting or event, go to meetings.hilton.com.
Are you followers?
Okay, so we're gonna probably add
Welcome to Gather Geeks, a podcast by BizBash, the place where people passionate about meetings and events come together. Here are your hosts, BizBash CEO David Adler and Editor-in-Chief Beth Kormanik.
Hi, David.
Hey, Beth, here we are, another Gather Geeks podcast.
Today, our guest is Chaz Edwards. He's the co-founder and publisher of the California Sunday Magazine and Pop-Up Magazine and president of Pop-Up Magazine Productions. Pop-Up Magazine is a live event, and the concept is to translate a general interest magazine to a live show. So you have reported stories presented in a multimedia format on a variety of topics, interspersed with ads. So from the first show in San Francisco, the concept grew in 2014 to a national tour, which continues to this day, and it was acquired by the Emerson Collective in 2018. So David, live journalism as a concept isn't new. What makes Pop-Up Magazine's concept interesting to you?
Well, I think it takes, we always talk about how do you bring something alive. Well, you're literally bringing something alive, and it's kind of the model for all sorts of other events and for other media properties that want to get better interaction with their audiences. Rather than being in that ivory tower and not connecting, just having people see what you do makes it more real.
Exactly. And Chaz is going to talk about the origin of the idea, the structure, the monetization strategy, because we know that's essential, and engagement strategies that grab audiences. So let's take a listen.
What was the genesis of that? I mean, yes, living journalism is something that Tina Brown's doing and that a lot of people are doing, but you're really sort of curating at a higher level.
Yeah, well, the origin story for Pop-Up Magazine goes back to 2009 here in San Francisco. And a couple of my colleagues here, Doug McGray, Lauren Smith, Derek Fagerstrom, Evan Ratliff, kind of came together with this idea that their backgrounds are in writing features for magazines and video production and radio work. And they came together with an idea of wouldn't it be interesting to bring together great journalistic storytellers from the world of magazines, the world of photography, the world of radio and podcast, the world of documentary film, and to create one thing across media formats, to make a magazine that's performed live in a theater. And so the first Pop-Up Magazine show happened in San Francisco in 2009 in a small theater in the Mission District here. And there wasn't a company around it. It was an experiment or a hobby at the time, but it took off. After that very first show at the after party, people who came to the show really enjoyed it. They didn't know what to expect when they walked in, but they were walking out wondering when the next show would be so they could bring friends. And so it began for us an organic growth trajectory. Every other time we did a Pop-Up Magazine show in San Francisco, we had to move to a theater that was triple the size. And finally, we ended up at the Symphony Hall in San Francisco, and we would sell that out in minutes without any conventional marketing, really just purely through word of mouth and social media. It was at that time that we thought that this might be bigger than a hobby, that we should do this more ambitiously. We should bring the live show to audiences in cities across the country and maybe beyond that at some point. And it was at that point that we decided to quit our day jobs and do it for real.
And was this the Emerson Collective acquisition that's here?
No, so that's a more recent thing that's happened. So the chronology for us was Pop-Up Magazine was born in 2009. The company itself was born in 2013, and then in 2014, is when we launched California Sunday Magazine, and Pop-Up Magazine came back as a more frequent live show that would tour cities across the country. And later in our existence, we did a financing round in 2016, and the Emerson Collective was a lead investor in that. So we've gotten to know them over the years. And in November of 2018, Emerson Collective acquired the rest of Pop-Up Magazine Productions, the rest that they didn't own from that earlier
And
round.
California Magazine? California
That's right.
Sunday? Okay.
Yep. So they acquired the company, and the company makes both Pop-Up Magazine and the California Sunday Magazine.
And so everyone seems to be bullish on print and live in this world, which is good for me because I just relaunched my magazine.
Yeah, well, I'm bullish as well. I mean, I guess the way that we look at it here is we start with stories that we think are wonderful stories and the world needs to know about. And we start with the story, and then we think about ways to craft that story for different environments that our fans and readers might be interested in enjoying that story. So we find a story, and if we can imagine a way that it can come to life live on stage with a band on one side of the stage and the journalist at a microphone on the other side, and beautiful photography and animation above them in a live theater, then that's a story that we bring to our live event. And if that story or a different story could make for a beautiful, unforgettable reading experience on your phone or on your way home from work, or Sunday morning in a print edition while you brew a second pot of coffee, we want to bring these stories to an audience. And we start with the story and start with the audience, and then adapt the story for the appropriate format afterwards.
So is the key driver the editor of these of the organization, in a sense? Is there someone with the vision, of course, with other people helping, but is that the center piece?
It is. That's exactly right. So my partner in the business, Doug McGray, is the editor-in-chief over both Pop-Up Magazine and the California Sunday Magazine. And Doug has brilliance and vision, but even more than that, he has a great ability to find exceptional talent. And so we have a team of editors and producers whose primary job is to go out into the world and talk to the people who are uncovering great stories. And because we work across format, those story makers can be magazine writers, they can be radio people, they can be filmmakers, they can be photographers. And it's the hardest work that we do is finding those stories, finding a story that's never been told, and then figuring out a way to craft it so that people will never forget it.
So, but I'm very interested in the whole idea of experience creators meeting collaboration artists, so that the story that you say has an impact with the people that are listening to it. Do you go that far? Or is it right now a stage version that you're depending on the organic impact? Or are you going further, or will you?
I think we're going further. I mean, we find stories that are stories about interesting people that can open our eyes to the world in ways that are sometimes funny, sometimes beautiful, almost always surprising, and once we find that story, that's the foundational unit, is the story. But we live in a moment where there's such a great opportunity to make that story come to life, make that story go from a single dimension, which might be words, into a three-dimensional experience that's combining multimedia in many different definitions. Multimedia certainly in terms of let's have words to narrate the story. Let's bring in recorded voices from the world so that characters can speak for themselves. There's sometimes opportunities for photography to enhance a story.
Yeah.
and we've created inside of Pop-Up Magazine experiences that also spill off the stage. In our most recent touring show in the fall of last year, a science writer came to us with a story about the state of genetic engineering, and the geneticists are now at the point where they're approaching the ability to bring extinct species back to life. And the science is very complicated. There's certainly ethical questions and horror movie scenarios that we all imagine. It's a very rich topic. It can be a complicated topic, particularly at the level of the science. And so we wanted to figure out how to make this story accessible to an audience of people that don't have PhDs in science. And so we worked with the reporter as well as with some scientists to bring an extinct flower back to life. And as the journalist was on stage describing the experience, all of the fans that were sitting in the audience in their programs had a package that included a scented card in it. And at a certain point in the story, the reporter invited all of us in the audience to tear open those packages and smell the scent of a flower that went extinct a century earlier.
Great.
And so that's an example of the kind of opportunity we have when we're doing journalism in a live setting, that we can make stories deeply visceral.
How do you are you in one sense, with what I see in the event world and the conference world and things like that, you're competing with a TED experience, for example, which is what, I just listened to a Chris Anderson, Ezra Klein podcast actually this morning about he's talking about some of the same types of things. He's trying to find the best stories and not the best communicators, and then working with the communicators to tell the story in a better way. He's story first now, it looks like. But most conferences are just like, they don't even, people are spending a lot of money and they're getting kind of mediocre storytelling.
Yeah. I mean, I do think our view of it is that the story is the hero, and the story is the hard thing to find and the hard thing to craft. Once you get that part right, the people that we work with that are the performers on stage at Pop-Up Magazine, for the most part, are not professional performers. They're not professional speakers. Most of them don't have any kind of training in acting. And the format of Pop-Up Magazine is designed for exactly that we don't require that somebody has a tremendous stage presence to be successful at Pop-Up Magazine. We do expect them to be great storytellers and journalists, and define that story and work with us on telling it. But then around that contributor, and we refer to our cast as contributors rather than performers for that reason, that they're journalists first, and they work with us in advance of the show on editing a script. And when the night of showtime, they walk out to the microphone with a script in their hand, and all that's really required of them is to read that. And the Pop-Up Magazine is making the theatricality around them. So if there are multimedia elements like tape from the field or film footage, we're doing the mixing for them live from the tech booth. We have a band on stage that's live scoring the piece and can adjust to the pacing of the contributor at the microphone. So our belief is that the story comes first, and then we can build the theater show around that story, and we aren't reliant on the contributor to bring the performative aspect to it.
What about the live piece that is so powerful that you can't get in the digital world, in terms of your experience with this?
There are a couple of things that we love about live. We make Pop-Up Magazine for one audience, one night only. We're not filming and recording the show for people to watch it on YouTube later. We're making a show for the people in that room. And that allows us to, it frees us to take advantage of the space that we're in. We can take advantage of the light design in the theater, how dark it is, how light it is. We can project things on the wall. We can hand things out to the audience so they can eat it or smell it to accompany a story. And we have the benefit of having 2,000 or 3,000 people in the same room at the same time, and that experience of enjoying a story with 3,000 other people brings another dimension to a story that reading something on your phone generally doesn't. The community aspect of the story.
I mean, it's the neuroscience of all this stuff that a lot of people don't realize is so impactful in a live experience. And that's really important, and we promote that all the time, that the live experience is the oxytocin exchange and things like that are really happening chemically as well.
Yeah. I mean, I myself don't know too much about brain chemistry, but there is something that we can feel in the room you can feel the emotion. You can see the contagion of laughter in a story. You can hear you can audibly hear a moment of surprise in a story when 3,000 people are experiencing the same thing at exactly the same time, and it's wonderful.
We talk about experiential marketing and all this kind of stuff, and it's become kind of like a commodity almost, where you seem to be crafting these experiences in a much more tailored way. Do you think that we're going to, do you think that the audiences are becoming more discriminating and want to experience things in these more authentic ways that you're doing it? And that there's a life stage, I guess, to this, corporate commercialism when they talk about experiences. Do you have any sort of opinions on that?
The audience that comes to Pop-Up Magazine it's a pretty young crowd. It's people in their 20s and 30s and 40s. It's people that tend to work in creative industries, technology and design and architecture and media. And so it's a crowd that is spending much of their professional lives and a lot of their social lives interacting with people through technology devices. And what we've observed is just how refreshing it is for all of us who live that life, live a life that's mediated in a lot of ways by digital technology. There's a great delight in coming together with a bunch of people that share an interest with you, a bunch of people that who love stories, and that you sit through this experience with them. And at the end of a Pop-Up Magazine show, part of the experience is we open bars in the lobbies of the theaters, and all of the contributors and everybody from Pop-Up Magazine comes out into the lobby, and everyone from the audience is invited as well. And it's an opportunity to talk to the people that made the show or performed in the show. And it's also an opportunity just to meet other interesting people. You brought some friends, you run into some people you know. And I think that there's a greater currency in doing things live together with a community now because of technology.
We're going to take a little break and come right back after this message from Hilton. So when's the big event? Hilton's here for planners with their exclusive customized meetings. Become a wow maker and save time by letting Hilton help you present an extraordinary event, one that leads to memorable and meaningful connections. Visit meetings.hilton.com and let Hilton help you. Do you think that is the fan base different for the magazine than it is for the pop-up zine?
No, it's actually quite similar, yeah. and that's deliberate. I'll explain what I mean by that. So Pop-Up Magazine started first, and it gave us an opportunity to look around the room and see who enjoyed the kinds of stories we make. We got to talk to them afterwards. We found out what they did for a living and what they liked and what they didn't like. And so when we launched the California Sunday magazine, we took a different approach to distribution of the print edition. Rather than printing millions and millions of copies and putting them on newsstands around the country and seeing who picked it up, we distribute the print edition through the Los Angeles Times Sunday edition and the San Francisco Chronicle Sunday edition. And we don't distribute to 100% of those Sunday subscribers to those papers. Instead, we worked with them to handpick a subset of their Sunday readers that look most like the people who come to pop-up magazine shows. So while California Sunday is a consumer title, it's a national general interest magazine, but from a business standpoint, our distribution model is more similar to a controlled circulation magazine than a consumer magazine.
And the business model sounds like you have live ads and sponsorships for the most part.
That's right. So we generate money a couple of different ways. Certainly, the print edition of California Sunday, we have print advertisers in there. That's one way we make money. Another very big way we make money is around the pop-up magazine shows, and that's from ticket sales. So people are paying anywhere from $29 to $80 to buy a ticket, depending on where you sit. And so some of the revenue is ticket sales, but also in between the editorial stories that we do on stage, we do live advertising for the show's sponsors. And the way that happens in the show is each time a new contributor takes to the microphone to perform a story, the title of that story is printed on the screen in giant yellow letters with a byline. And when one presenter walks off the stage and we're going to do an advertising break, we use those same big yellow letters to say advertisement. So it's very transparent to the audience that, like all of your favorite magazines, we have advertising. It's just that we do our advertising live. And we take a short commercial break, and we then work with the brands to develop for them anything from a multimedia version of a podcast sponsorship to a custom photo essay. Like we did live photo essays for Coach, and we've done them for Lexus. We've also done we've done advertising that brings live music into it. So with Amazon Studios, for example, we worked with them on creating in effect a live trailer for an upcoming film with a live score performed by our house band. And we've also made short films and short animations from brands from Google to Bullet Whiskey to others.
So you won't just let them, get on stage and do whatever they want. It sounds like
that's right. We don't let them just get on stage and do whatever they want. However, we are open to other people being on stage if we can work with them on a live performance that fits into the show and sort of fits within the time constraints of the advertising breaks. And so we did a campaign in a show last year where Citibank was the sponsor, and Citibank was working with an author named Jonathan Rose, who's a big thinker and writer about urban planning and what cities might look like in the future. And Jonathan had just recently published a book. And so we worked with Citi and with Jonathan to get him on stage to do a kind of a 90-second extract from the book. And then we designed artwork to be projected on the screen above him. And so it was an advertising moment, but we had a live presenter and bespoke artwork to make it come to life. So we're open to that, but it requires pretty careful coordination with the sponsor to make sure that they have success with our audience and that our audience likes them joining the party.
And what is your ad edit ratio?
So in your average pop-up magazine show, there would be 10 editorial stories. There would be 4 sponsors, and the sponsor pieces are generally about 90 seconds long. So 4 times 90 seconds is advertising, and 10 times 6 or 7 minutes is the average length of the editorial stories. So it's overwhelmingly editorial storytelling with a minority of the time handed over to sponsor breaks.
And do you envision this in other realms. I mean, I'm seeing this in the B2B space in a really interesting way for like we do our conferences. This is something that I think that we're striving to do, actually.
Absolutely. We started with the idea of Pop-Up Magazine, a show in a theater, and we sell tickets and have a couple sponsors in it. As we've grown, we've wanted to bring Pop-Up Magazine to more audiences in more places. And one way to do that is for us to team up with members of our community, fans of the show, who approach us and say, gee, I like what you're doing. I wonder if I could make my own pop-up magazine or my own live storytelling show in my town or at my school or in a museum that I curate. And we create a toolkit for independent producers that want to make their own shows. And we call this product Pop-Up Zine instead of Pop-Up Magazine. And it's a toolkit that helps enable a passionate independent producer to make their own version of the show, a more intimate version. It's technically easier to produce, but it allows us to collaborate with the broader community to bring a version of Pop-Up Magazine to lots of people in places that we haven't gotten to yet.
How do you do the quality control of this if you're not recording it or you're not sort of taking documentation of it?
You know, that we're still figuring that out right now, and the first phase of that is that we've had lots of members of the community apply to put on their own Pop-Up Magazine shows, and we're moving very deliberately and carefully at finding independent producers that we can stay close to and make sure that the quality of the experience is wonderful. And as this product evolves, and we're looking at different ways that we can expand to lots and lots of these shows, while at the same time staying close enough that we can maintain a level of quality experience for audiences, even if we're not in the room.
So what advice would you give to another magazine, any other magazine, who says, okay, this is a great idea. I want to create this same type of thing for my niche, my audience. What are the pitfalls that what's the cautionary tale that you would give to a New York magazine that decides, oh, we have to do this?
Well, you know, I've, from my own experience, because I've worked at a lot of different media companies over the last 25 years, and at other points in my career, at other media companies, we would make publications on the web, or we would make television shows, or we would make print magazines. And at one point or another, we would decide it was time for us to make a live event because it sounded like the money was good over there. And our intention was very often money first, right, figure out the product second. And Pop-Up Magazine started the other way around. You know, I mentioned in the early days of Pop-Up Magazine, there was no company. There was a group of us that wanted to make something that we would enjoy ourselves, and we thought our friends would enjoy, and we thought there might be people we didn't know yet that would enjoy it. And we started from a point of saying, make a wonderful experience. And in the early days, sponsorship was a very small part of what we did, a very small part of the money that came in the door. Most of the money in the early days was through ticket sales. And when you're asking individuals to buy tickets on their own credit card and bring a date or bring a friend, it sets a very high bar for the programming experience. And so from the very beginning, Pop-Up Magazine was selling tickets directly to consumers, and we felt a great obligation to give them a wonderful, unforgettable evening. And that's been a guiding light for us ever since. And even as we've brought sponsors in, sponsors like the approach we've taken as well, that it's always been about the audience experience first. And so when a sponsor comes to us and wants to be a part of the show, it's because they want to connect with that very same audience. And they ask us for our advice. And so we in fact have a team here at Pop-Up Magazine Productions. It's a team that's separate from our editorial group, but it's a brand studio that is staffed with people that have editorial backgrounds, and they're people who really understand the sensibility of pop-up magazine and the experience of being in that theater. And our job in the brand studio is to help sponsors take their creative brief and translate it into an experience that will fit into a pop-up magazine show and be embraced by the audience with the same enthusiasm as they embrace the editorial stories.
That makes total sense. One of the things you've got coming up is a tour, and do you want to give us a little bit of insight in how that works? And it's the same performers in each show, pretty much, traveling with you?
Yeah, that's right. So I'll tell you a little bit about the process by which we make a show, and then I can tell you about the one that's coming up shortly. The process of making a new issue of Pop-Up Magazine is that our producers reach out into the world and hunt for stories and talk to lots of smart people that are out in the world making stories and films and photo projects and podcasts. And we search for stories that have never been told before, brand new stories that are original and stories that are compelling and surprising. And they generally are taking a look at as many as 200 story pitches to hone down to about 10 stories that will be performed on any given night of a pop-up magazine tour. And most of those stories travel from city to city. So this upcoming tour, which kicks off in Los Angeles on January 30th and then continues through the San Francisco Bay Area and New York and DC and Atlanta and Austin, many of the stories are the same from night to night, and there generally will be one or two stories that only happen in that city's version of the show. That's an opportunity for us to do something that might have particular appeal to people in a theater in DC, because that's an audience that's different than the crowd that'll be at the Los Angeles show the week before.
So you're differentiating each one pretty much, or with something?
So yes, that's right. So the bulk of the stories, many of the stories will be traveling and will be the same from show to show, but there will be a couple of stories in every show that would be different just for that night.
And go back a little bit in terms of a story. What is the life stages of that story? Because everyone, in the magazine world, you plan it a long time in advance, but you're adding all these other elements to it. So it has to be precision, I assume, in some form.
Yes. Are we recording? Yes, there's a lot of precision and perfection on it. But I'll also tell you that the process has moments where it's a little less planned. But it basically, the way it works is that our producer team gets together every week, and they're sharing story pitches for an upcoming show. And this process starts 5 to 6 months before we go on tour with a new show. So 5 to 6 months out, the story producers are on the hunt for stories, and they're working with prominent writers and filmmakers and photographers and radio people to find those stories. And over the course of that early stage, the focus is on the story itself, the story pitch, the narrative arc. What is it about this story that's surprising? What is it about this story that's beautiful? What is it about this story that's funny? And once a story is identified and assigned, the process looks quite a bit like any other magazine in print or digital, which is the producer is working with the journalist on a draft of a script. And so there's the editorial process starts at the script level. And it's much later in the process, when that script is locked down, that we then bring in the art department to start imagining how to bring the story to life on that giant screen above the contributor in the theater. And we also bring in the band to start thinking about an original composition that can score that piece. And it's also at that moment that we start to think about magic. I think we're in a theater and we're doing a story about science and bringing plants back from extinction. And somebody in the room comes up with the idea of like, gosh, would it be possible if we could let people actually smell it? Or it might be a story that's about food. And we say, would it be possible to bake 10,000 marshmallows, one flavored with Saigon cinnamon and one flavored with cinnamon from India, and let the audience taste the story? We did a story in a recent show that was about that was set in New York in the 80s and 90s. And it was a story about a graffiti artist that was tagging buildings and phone booths across the boroughs of New York, and it was a bit of a mystery story about who this person was and what this tag meant. And it was at that later stage that one of our producers had the idea of taking the tag and recreating it as light art and using Gobi projectors in the theater to start projecting this graffiti tag on the ceiling and walls and floor of the theater. And so as people were listening to a story that was being narrated at a microphone on stage and watching animation on the screen, they experienced a bit of what New Yorkers in the 80s and early 90s felt as the spaces around them became tagged with graffiti.
Yeah, that's fabulous. That is, I'm getting goosebumps listening to the way you talk. And one of the reasons that I wanted you on this podcast is I believe that the people in our industry, the event organizing community, needs to see this. And they need to experience it, because people in the event world, the experiential world, need to sort of eat and drink inspiration for breakfast, lunch, and dinner to serve their audiences in better ways. And I think one of the things that this appeals to me about is to inspire people. So with that said, if you can forgive a crass plug, I have a great idea for folks who to whom this sounds like an inspiring kind of event. We're coming to a town near you. Okay.
Our winter tour, which I mentioned, kicks off in Los Angeles at the Ace Theater on January 30th. We're then in Oakland, California, the 1st of February. We come to New York City at the Opera House out at BAM in Fort Greene on February 7th. And then we continue on to Washington, D.C., Atlanta, and Austin later in February.
And how do people get tickets?
If you visit popupmagazine.com, which is our website, there are the first thing you'll see is a button that allows you to buy tickets for whatever show is most convenient for you.
And the last question I want to ask is, where do you see this in the next few years? I mean, what is your vision for this? Is it one tour a year? Is it different topics? How do you sort of either scale it or make it even improve the quality even more? Yeah,
well, we're so excited about the future. I mean, we feel like we're only partway through chapter 1 of the book we're trying to write here. Pop-Up Magazine right now, we put together a new show 3 times a year, and we tour it to a handful of cities. And one of the most immediate things that we want to do is we want to bring Pop-Up Magazine to more cities. And so one part of our vision is finding ways to bring the show to different kinds of venues, different cities, bigger shows, smaller shows, and everything in between. And so the part of our hope with Pop-Up Zine, which is the DIY version of the show, is that through that we hope to find people around the country and around the world who like what we're doing and join up with us and invite us to their city so that we can bring Pop-Up Magazine more places. A second thing we're doing is we're always curious about new experiments and setting constraints on ourselves and see what kind of creativity blossoms within those constraints. And so we periodically do themed shows. So we've done a couple of music specials. We did a sports themed show in collaboration with ESPN once. We did a food themed show, and instead of doing it in a theater, we took over a supper club and we performed 16 stories in the pop-up magazine style, all about food and food culture. And we fed everybody as they were listening to those stories. Wow. And everything on their plate, including the plates themselves, were connected to one of the stories that they were hearing. And it was, to us, a wonderful opportunity to think about how journalism and story can work in different ways and connect to different audiences. Because one of the things we love about the live format, the idea of making a magazine as an evening of entertainment, is it sounds fun. And so people say, well, instead of going to see music or going out to a movie tonight, why don't we make date night about this thing, Pop-Up Magazine? And people come because it's fun, it's beautiful, and it's entertaining. And it gives us an opportunity to go to some deeper places as well. Once people are in the theater and they trust us, we have an opportunity to talk not just about funny stories or beautiful stories, but also stories that are important in the culture now. And there's a subversive element to it in some ways, which is, you came because it's fun and beautiful. You wouldn't have built date night around a long conversation about awful things that are happening at the U.S.-Mexico border today, but we might be able to put a story like that inside a show and sort of touch people's hearts and motivate them to think about the world in different ways and perhaps do something after the show because of what they saw in it.
Yep. No, I think you're inspiring people to take action because they're relating to what it is. It sounds fantastic. So, wow, this is really, I do believe that this is the future of connecting, people connecting, and I really applaud you for doing it and being part of this grand experiment that seems to be working.
Well, it's, we're early days, but we're thrilled to get to do what we do, to make these shows and to bring these stories in front of audiences. And most of the people that come to the shows really love it. And it feels wholly unique. And it's the kind of thing that people tell us they want more of it. And so it's a privilege for us to have this opportunity to make more, do new experiments, bring this to new audiences, and do journalism in a whole new kind of way.
That's fantastic. So thank you so much, Chaz, and we'll keep watching and look forward to connecting in other ways.
David, thanks for having me on the show. It was great chatting.
Thank you.
Thanks, David, for that conversation. At BizBash, we've covered the media industry shift to events as a growing part of their revenue stream for a while now. But, this is something different. And I feel like the commitment to multimedia and the interactivity, these scent cards for the audience that he mentioned, and other ideas, and the touring nationwide. Not to mention they collaborated with ESPN on a sports theme show. They created a supper club for a show about food. So I think they're taking this in some new directions.
Absolutely. And I think that this is, I love the fact that they're experimenting so that people that are in our industry, the event organizers for their own brand, can take some of these ideas and actually use them in their own ways to communicate what they do.
Right. That's a good point. And I kind of see it as a two-way street because there's what you're saying, that there's much that event professionals can learn from this. But also at Pop-Up Magazine, they're using a lot of these time-tested event techniques in this, in this environment.
Well, you're seeing all these big brands, these big companies, especially the big media brands. CBS, for example, is now getting into the idea of taking all of their brands and trying to create experiential events around them. So that it's a whole nother, not only a revenue stream, but a whole nother engagement philosophy.
Right, building those brands. And another thing that you got into in the conversation is this, the next evolution of what they're doing, creating this toolkit version that they're developing for independent producers and community groups to create their own events in this model. And that's something I feel that we've seen with TEDx and, even The Moth from NPR. And it's kind of this growing trend that we've noticed, this event templates that can then be monetized. People
want to emulate these big events that they see. It's interesting sometimes when you go to some of these markets and you see these record launches or these album launches by local groups emulating how the big national brands do their product launches, and everybody wants to do them on a local basis because there's something cool about it and something engaging about this.
And for the brand or the person everybody's looking up to recognize that and then say, we're going to help you.
Yeah.
And here's how you do it.
Yeah.
And you can use our name for that kind of seal of approval or touch point that people can recognize is really interesting.
When I was a kid, I remember the biggest rage was muscular dystrophy carnivals. And they created a template for doing it, and everyone did it in their own backyards.
Based on the MDA telethon.
Based on the telethon. And it was really the way to scale this in a very organic way. And it was really a brilliant approach. And you're seeing this happen globally with events. But I do think, bringing it even back to your backyard was brilliant at the time.
Right. Kind of reminds me of the ice bath challenge.
People want to participate. It
Exactly.
comes back to the sort of the strategies of events and participation.
Right.
So, Beth, what else is going on at BizBash?
Well, speaking about event planners and event planning being in the zeitgeist, David, I know you're aware of the new Netflix documentary series, 7 Days Out. So it takes a look at the 7 days leading up to some big events, from a Chanel fashion show to the Kentucky Derby. And style editor Michelle Loffick talked with executive producer Joe Z in a conversation that's on bizbash.com. So that's fun and relevant, speaks to what's happening today. And so I'd recommend that piece this week.
Great. And as we start a whole new year, we've got a lot of stuff planned, so stay tuned.
Absolutely.
So before we end, I want to thank our people that put this production on. Just like we're in the event industry, we care about who does the decor and the load in and all of that. We care about who puts our podcast together. So I want to thank Claire Hoffman, who handles our editorial duties, Dave Nelson, who is our producer, and Rebecca Pappas, who is responsible for our audience development so that you can hear the podcast yourself. So with that said, what do we say now?
Gather on.
Gather on.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or your favorite podcast app. We can be found on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Player FM, Google Play, and Pocket Cast. Be sure to leave us a rating and review. It helps others discover the Gather Geeks podcast. We'd also love to hear from you. You can leave feedback on Twitter @GatherGeeks or leave us an email, gathergeeks@bizbash.com. We hope you'll join us again for the next episode of Gather Geeks. Until then, gather on.